They read her name next to a stranger's Khalid, and she didn't say a word. One misprint, one flash, and the whole room believed it. She always corrects everything. Tonight, she let the mistake stand.
By morning, the whole world thought they were a couple, and she still hadn't corrected it. She never fixed the mistake. She just kept showing up for it.
The champagne glass in Elena Voss's hand had gone warm 20 minutes ago, and she still hadn't taken a single sip. If you have ever pretended to belong somewhere you didn't feel you belonged, stay until the end of this story, because what happened to Elena that night will make you believe that the best things in life arrive disguised as mistakes. And if this story moves you even a little, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe before we go any further, because you will want to be here for what happens next. Elena was 34 years old, and she ran a design technology company worth $400 million. She had built it from a laptop in a cramped apartment into an empire with glass offices in 3 cities, and she had done it almost entirely alone. People who met her assumed she had a team of advisors, a family fortune, a husband managing her calendar. She had none of that. She had spreadsheets, sleepless nights, and a mother who called every Sunday to ask when she was finally going to stop working so hard and start living. Elena always laughed that question off. Living, to her, had become something other people did. She had a company to run. She had started the company in her second bedroom, with 2 employees, and a credit card she wasn't to mean. Sure, she could pay off. And for 9 years, she had said yes to every extra hour, every red-eye flight, every holiday spent reading contracts instead of unwrapping presents, because she believed, the way only a person who has been underestimated her whole life can believe, that stopping even for a moment would mean losing everything she had fought to build. Her father had left when she was 9. Her mother had raised 3 kids on a nurse's salary and a stubborn refusal to ever ask anyone for help, and Elena had absorbed that lesson so completely that by the time she was old enough to need help herself, she no longer knew how to accept it. She dated occasionally, in the careful, scheduled way she did everything else, and every relationship eventually collided with the same wall. A work trip that couldn't be rescheduled, a launch that couldn't wait, a version of Elena that showed up fully present only for the company and gave everyone else the leftovers. She had stopped being surprised when people left. She had started, quietly, to expect it. That evening, she was standing in the ballroom of the Marigold Hotel at a charity gala for underprivileged families, wearing a navy gown she'd bought in 15 minutes because she hated shopping for herself. Her assistant, Priya, had begged her to attend for the optics. The gala was hosted by a foundation her company sponsored, and this year, they wanted her to be photographed, to look human, approachable, warm. Elena had agreed reluctantly. She hated galas. She hated small talk. She hated being looked at as though she were an achievement rather than a person. Across the room, Daniel Cole was trying to keep his tie straight, and his 6-year-old daughter, Mia, from climbing under the dessert table. Daniel was 38, a structural engineer, who spent his days making sure buildings didn't fall down, and his nights making sure his daughter didn't fall apart. His wife, Claire, had died 2 years earlier, a sudden illness that had taken 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, and since then, Daniel's entire life had folded itself around one small, stubborn, wonderful little girl who still slept with her mother's cardigan every night. He had come to the gala because Mia's school was one of the foundation's beneficiaries, and because Mia had begged to wear her fancy dress, and because saying yes to her was easier than saying no to anything else in his life right now. The 11 weeks between Claire's diagnosis and her funeral had rearranged Daniel from the inside out. He remembered almost nothing about the actual construction projects he'd worked on that year, but he remembered every single detail of the hospital room, the particular gray of the light through the blinds at 4 in the morning, the exact way Claire had made him promise near the end, that he would let himself be happy again someday, and not just endure the years for Mia's sake. He had nodded and meant it, and then spent 2 years failing to keep the promise, because happiness felt like a door he no longer remembered how to open, and because every time a well-meaning coworker tried to set him up with someone, he pictured Mia coming home to a stranger, and it made his chest cave in. He had built his entire life into a fortress around one small girl, and he had gotten so good at being both mother and father that he'd nearly forgotten there was supposed to be room in that life for himself, too. Neither Daniel nor Elena had any idea that a volunteer coordinator, overwhelmed and undertrained, had misprinted the seating chart. Table 14 was supposed to seat the Voss Technologies delegation and, separately, the Cole family as guests of the school program. Instead, someone had merged 2 spreadsheet rows during a rushed formatting fix, and the printed place cards read, in elegant calligraphy, Elena Voss and Daniel Cole, Table 14. When the MC took the stage an hour later to thank the evening's top donors and the wonderful families supporting our children, he read straight from that same faulty list. And let's give a warm round of applause, he said, beaming at the wrong slide on the screen behind him, for Elena and Daniel, who've so generously supported 3 of our scholarship students this year. The room erupted in applause. Cameras turned. A photographer from the local paper, working the room for a community spirit feature, swung his lens directly at their table, just as Daniel, startled, reached out a hand to steady Elena's chair as she rose in confusion, and the 2 of them ended up standing side by side, blinking into a flashbulb, looking, to every single person in that ballroom, exactly like a couple. Elena opened her mouth to correct it. She always corrected things. It was, in fact, one of her defining traits. She corrected typos in emails before hitting send, corrected board members mid-sentence when their numbers were off, corrected her own posture in mirrored elevators. But something about the warmth radiating off the room, the sincerity in strangers' eyes as they clapped, the little girl in a purple dress tugging on Daniel's sleeve and whispering, "Daddy, are we famous?" Something about all of it made the words die in Elena's throat. So instead, she smiled. She said nothing, and the mistake became, for one strange and glittering night, the truth. They sat together, because it would have looked strange not to. They talked, because there was nothing else to do. And somewhere between the auction of a hand-painted mural and the last slow song of the evening, Elena realized she was having an actual conversation for the first time in longer than she could crack. Not a negotiation, not a pitch, not a performance. Just 2 tired adults comparing notes on how exhausting it is to hold everything together. Daniel told her about Claire without flinching, which surprised him. Elena told him about the apartment she'd once shared with a fiancé who left when her company started requiring more of her than he was willing to compete with, which surprised her. Mia fell asleep against Elena's arm during dessert, and neither adult moved for 20 minutes, because neither of them wanted to be the one who broke the moment. By the time the gala ended, the photograph had already been posted to the Foundation's social media, captioned, "Elena Voss and Daniel Cole enjoying tonight's celebration." It was retweeted, then reshared, then picked up by a business gossip account with 500,000 followers under the headline, "Reclusive Tech CEO Elena Voss spotted with mystery man and adorable daughter." By morning, it had 11,000 likes. Priya called before 8 a.m., her voice somewhere between panic and delight. "Do you want to tell me who Daniel Cole is?" she said. "Or do you want me to keep reading the comments? Because the comments have a lot of theories." Elena sat on the edge of her bed, coffee untouched, staring at her phone. She could have called the Foundation. She could have issued a 2-line correction. Instead, she found herself scrolling through the photo again, looking at her own face in it, relaxed, unguarded, almost happy, and she didn't recognize the woman in the picture, but she wanted to. She told Priya it was a misunderstanding. She did not tell her to fix it. Her mother called an hour later, because her mother had somehow already seen it, because her mother saw everything within minutes of it existing on the internet. A skill Elena had never understood in a woman who still used a flip phone for actual calls. "Who is he?" her mother asked, not bothering with hello. "Is he good to you? Does he have a job? Why do I have to learn about my daughter's boyfriend from a screenshot my book club sent me?" Elena tried to explain the seating chart, the mistake, the misunderstanding, and her mother went quiet, in a way that was somehow worse than the interrogation. "You know," she said finally, "in that photo, you're smiling like I haven't seen you smile since you were 22. I don't care whose mistake it was. Don't you dare go fix it out of embarrassment." It was, Elena would think later, the first time in years her mother had told her not to correct something. She hadn't planned to listen, but she noticed, over the following days, that she wasn't reaching for her phone to call the foundation. She wasn't drafting the correction email that would have taken her 90 seconds to send. She told herself it was because a public correction would only draw more attention to a story that was already fading. She did not examine, too closely, the small, warm feeling that rose in her chest every time she remembered the weight of a sleeping child against her arm. Daniel, for his part, discovered the photo when his sister sent it to him, with 17 exclamation points. He laughed, at first. Then Mia saw it on his phone and asked, with the devastating directness only a 6-year-old possesses, "Is that lady going to be my new mommy?" Daniel did not have an answer for that. He should have called the paper. He should have posted a clarification. Instead, he found himself thinking about the way Elena had listened, actually listened, not waited for her turn to speak. When he talked about Claire, and about how Mia had held Elena's hand without hesitation, something she almost never did with new people anymore. 2 weeks passed. Neither of them corrected anything. They told themselves it was because correcting it publicly would be more embarrassing than letting it fade quietly. They told themselves a lot of things. What actually happened was that Elena texted Daniel to ask, absurdly, whether Mia's school still needed volunteers for the reading program, and Daniel said yes, and Elena showed up on a Thursday afternoon in jeans instead of a blazer, and read a picture book about a brave little fox to a room of first graders, while Mia sat in the front row, grinning like she'd won something. After that, the visits kept happening. Not dates, they insisted to themselves. Visits. Except Daniel started making 2 coffees instead of 1. Except Elena started leaving the office an hour earlier on Thursdays, something her calendar had not allowed in 6 years. On the 4th Thursday, it rained hard enough that the reading program was canceled, and Daniel, standing under the school's front awning with Mia asleep against his shoulder from a long day, found Elena's car idling at the curb anyway. She rolled down the window. "I know it's canceled," she said. "I just didn't want to turn around and find out I'd driven here for nothing." He laughed, really laughed, for what felt like the first time in months, and asked if she wanted to get takeout instead. Nothing fancy, just noodles from the place or around the corner that Mia insisted on ordering from every single week. Elena said yes before she'd finished thinking about it, which was, for a woman who scheduled her own spontaneity, something close to a miracle. They sat on the floor of Daniel's small living room because the good couch was covered in Mia, art projects, and they ate out of paper cartons while Mia narrated an elaborate story involving her stuffed rabbit and a mission to the moon. And Elena realized, somewhere around the 2nd carton of noodles, that she had not checked her phone once in almost 2 hours. She mentioned it out loud, half joking, and Daniel said, without looking up from twirling noodles for Mia, "Maybe that's the whole trick. Find someone who makes the phone boring by comparison." Elena didn't have a clever response to that. She just sat with it, turning it over, surprised by how much she wanted it to be true. Their conversations, over the following weeks, moved from careful to unguarded. Daniel told her about the year he'd nearly quit engineering entirely because he couldn't bear to be away from Mia for site visits, and how a manager he barely knew had quietly rearranged his schedule without being asked, just so he could make school pickups. Elena told him about the fiancé who'd once told her, in the middle of an argument, that competing with a company for her attention was like competing with a ghost. You could never actually win, because it was never fully there to fight. She had never repeated that line to anyone, saying it out loud to Daniel, in his cramped kitchen with a 6-year-old asleep on the couch behind them, felt less like confession and more like setting something down she'd been carrying for a very long time. The trouble started, as trouble often does, with someone who had something to gain from tearing it down. Marcus Reyes, the CEO of a rival firm that had spent 2 years trying to poach Voss Technologies' biggest client, saw an opportunity in the gossip. If Elena Voss was secretly dating a random engineer and hiding it from the public, that was one story, mildly charming, easily forgotten. But if a journalist could be pointed toward the seating chart error, toward the fact that the couple had never actually met before that night, the story became something else entirely. A CEO manufacturing a warm, relatable image through deception. Marcus made a call to a contact at a business tabloid. The contact made a call to the foundation. The foundation, panicking, admitted the truth about the seating error to a reporter named Talia Grant, who smelled a much bigger story than adorable mix-up, and started digging. Talia had built her career on exactly this kind of story. The gap between the image a powerful person projected and the messier truth underneath it, and she worked the phones for 3 straight days, talking to gala volunteers, a caterer who remembered the confusion over table 14, and a junior staffer at Voss Technologies, who, off the record and clearly nervous, confirmed that Elena had been seen leaving the office early on Thursdays for weeks. None of it was scandalous on its own. Strung together with the right framing, it read like a woman carefully constructing a fairy tale for public consumption, and Talia knew exactly how that framing would perform. The headline dropped on a Tuesday: "The truth behind Elena Voss's viral romance, and why she let the lie stand." The article was careful, factual, and devastating. It laid out the seating chart mistake in clinical detail. It quoted anonymous sources questioning whether Elena had orchestrated the confusion for good press. It included a photo of Daniel picking Mia up from school, unblurred, unasked for, with a caption asking whether a private father and daughter had been used as props in a billionaire's image rehab. Elena's phone did not stop ringing. Her board called an emergency session. Priya stood in her office doorway with an expression Elena had never seen on her before. Not judgment exactly, but worry. Real worry. "They want you to deny it," Priya said quietly. "Say it was a harmless mix-up. Say you barely know him. Distance yourself from the dad and the kid. Let the story die." It was, Elena knew, the smart move, the safe move, the move that protected the company, her reputation, 400 employees whose jobs depended on client trust. The emergency board session ran for 2 hours, and Elena sat through most of it in silence while 8 people who had never met Daniel Cole debated what to do about him, as though he were a line item. One board member, a man named Foster, who had been with the company since its 2nd year, argued that the fastest path forward was a statement distancing Elena entirely. Brief, boring, forgettable, he called it. The opposite of a headline. Another board member, more cautious, worried aloud about what a denial would look like if anyone ever produced evidence that the relationship, whatever it was, had continued for weeks after the gala. Elena listened to them talk about her life in the clinical language of risk management, and she thought about Mia's small hand finding hers without hesitation at the reading program, and about the particular quiet of Daniel's kitchen, and she understood that no board resolution was going to be able to touch the parts of the last month that had actually mattered to her. "I need until Thursday," she told them, and left before anyone could argue. There was a night, 2 days before the scandal broke wide open, when Daniel almost ended things himself, before anyone else could do it for him. He had seen the way reporters were starting to linger near the school gate, the way one had tried to photograph Mia through the fence during recess, until a teacher intervened. He drove to Elena's office that evening, not to comfort her, but to tell her he thought they should stop. Not because he didn't care about her, but because he cared too much about the 6-year-old, asleep at home, to let her become collateral damage in someone else's business war. I can't protect her from this, he said, standing in Elena's doorway, not sitting down, as if sitting down would mean staying. I promised myself after Claire that I'd never let Mia, whole world, depend on something that could be taken away from her again. Elena, for once, didn't argue with logic or numbers. She just asked him one question. Do you actually want to stop, or are you scared? And those are two different things, and I need you to tell me which one this is. Daniel stood there a long time before admitting, quietly, that it was the second one. He drove home without an answer that night, and Elena didn't sleep at all. Daniel called her that night, his voice tight. Maya asked me if she did something wrong, he said. She's 6, Elena. She thinks this is her fault. Elena sat in her dark office. The city lights spread out below her window, like something she'd built and could no longer feel connected to, and she understood, with total clarity, that there were two versions of the next 24 hours. In one, she released a statement, protected the company, and went back to being the woman in the elevator mirror, correcting her posture, alone. In the other, she told the truth, the real truth, not the convenient one, and risked everything the board was afraid of losing. The board had scheduled a press conference for Thursday morning, expecting a clean, clinical denial. Elena walked to the podium in the same navy gown she'd worn to the gala, which nobody but her would have noticed, and which she wore on purpose. Cameras clicked. Talia Grant sat in the second row with her pen ready for a correction, a distancing, a clean and boring non-story. 3 weeks ago, Elena said, a seating chart was printed incorrectly, and a stranger and I were introduced to a room full of people as a couple. That part is true, and it was an accident. She paused, and the room went very still. What happened after that was not an accident. I had a conversation with a man I had never met, about things I hadn't talked about with anyone in years. His daughter fell asleep on my arm, and I didn't want the night to end. I didn't correct the mistake, because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to correct anything. I wanted to stay in it. She looked directly into the cameras. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was nothing to protect a quarterly earnings call, when it has become one of the realest things in my life. Daniel Cole is not a prop. His daughter is not a headline. And if being honest about that costs this company something, then it costs this company something. Because I am done pretending that the people I love are inconvenient. The room erupted, not in scandal, but in something closer to astonishment. Talia Grant, to her credit, wrote a follow-up piece the next day titled, "The CEO Who Told the Truth Anyway," and it did more for Elena's reputation than any denial ever could have. The board grumbled, then quietly noted that client retention hadn't dropped a single percentage point. Marcus Reyes's plan collapsed under the weight of a story people actually wanted to believe in. Daniel watched the press conference from his kitchen, Mia eating cereal beside him, and when Elena said his name on live television, he had to set his coffee down because his hands weren't steady enough to hold it. That evening he drove to her office, past the security desk that knew him by now, up the elevator he'd never actually ridden before, and found her standing at her window, still in the navy dress, looking more exhausted and more free than he had ever seen her. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, Elena said. I wanted to. 6 months later, the reading program at Mia's school had a permanent Thursday volunteer, and the volunteer's name was on the sign-in sheet in Elena's own handwriting. No assistant required. Mia no longer slept with only her mother's cardigan. She'd added a second one, soft and gray, that smelled like Elena's perfume, sitting folded on the pillow beside it, because Mia had decided, entirely on her own terms and in her own time, that there was room in her heart for more than one kind of love. Elena still ran her company, still worked long hours, but she had learned to leave the office by 6 on Thursdays, and eventually most days, because she had finally found something worth correcting her old habits for. At the following year's gala, the seating chart was printed correctly. Elena and Daniel sat at the same table anyway, because this time, someone had asked them where they wanted to be seated, and they had both, without hesitation, given the same answer. The MC introduced them again to a round of applause, and this time when the cameras turned, Elena didn't hesitate for a second. She reached for Daniel's hand before anyone even asked. Priya, watching from across the room with a glass of actual champagne this time, leaned over to Talia Grant, who had been invited as a guest after her follow-up article ran, and said, "You know the funniest part? Compliance still hasn't figured out how to file this in the risk register." Talia laughed and admitted she still had the original misprinted seating chart from that first night, framed on her office wall, a souvenir from the story that had taught her something about what people actually want to read. Elena's mother came too, in a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, and spent most of the evening showing anyone who's stand still long enough the photo on her flip phone of Elena reading to a room of first graders, insisting, to Elena's mild embarrassment, that she'd known all along this was coming. Mia, older now by a year and considerably more confident in a room full of adults, stood on a chair at one point during dinner and announced to the table, unprompted, that she had two moms now, one in heaven and one who read her stories on Thursdays, and that she thought that was a pretty good deal, actually. The table went quiet for a moment, the particular quiet that comes right before people either cry or laugh, and then Daniel pulled his daughter into a hug so she wouldn't see his eyes, and Elena reached over and squeezed both of their hands at once, and nobody at that table needed a seating chart to tell them where they belonged. Years from now, when Mia is old enough to ask for the whole story instead of the bedtime version, Daniel plans to tell her the truth exactly as it happened, that a stranger's clerical error put her father next to a tired, guarded woman at a dinner table, and that neither of them corrected it because, for reasons neither could explain at the time, something in them already knew better than their own caution did. He plans to tell her that love, the real and lasting kind, rarely announces itself with certainty. It slips in through misprinted seating charts and rained out Thursdays and noodles eaten on the floor of a small living room, and it asks only one thing of the people it visits, with the willingness to stop correcting it long enough to let it stay. Sometimes the story you'd given by accident turns out to be truer than the one you were planning to live. Elena Voss spent a decade believing that the price of success was being alone at the top of it, and she almost let a stranger's honest mistake pass her by out of habit, out of fear, out of the sheer exhausting momentum of a life spent correcting everything that didn't go according to plan. But the best things rarely go according to plan. They arrive as typos, misprints, and mixed-up name cards, and the only thing required of us is the courage not to correct them. If Elena's story reminded you of your own crossroads, a moment you almost talked yourself out of, a mistake that turned out to be a gift, tell us about it in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because there are so many more stories like this one still to come.